I'm sitting here with Amin and Nitasha, who have been they're visiting Denmark now, and you have been involved in the Palestinian activism and struggle in New York for some years now.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy that you like to share your experiences and have a talk also about how we're going to move forward with fighting the Zionism on a daily basis, and the ongoing, how we can reach somewhere with the ongoing genocide, because it seems like everything is up the hill these days, and we are going in. The dark times don't seem to stop.
Yeah.
So maybe you can have a small introduction of make a small introduction of yourself.
Yeah. Sure. I'm Amin. I'm from a town called Elbira. I was born in the U.S. and my family went to Palestine when I was 1 year old. So I was raised in Palestine, and then I came to the U.S. to study. I was around 20. Studied philosophy, political science, studied law, practiced law for a little bit, and then got involved in the movement work in New York City in 2011.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
I'm Nitasha. I'm from India. I went to study in New York, and that's where I met Amin, and we formed the collective, MTL Collective. And since then, we've been part of different movements like Occupy Wall Street, the Black Liberation Solidarity Movement, organizing around Palestine, and then also the kind of indigenous resurgence that happened in 2016. A lot of solidarity work for that. We're also artists and researchers. You know, we've also taught at universities. We're also trying to make a film right now. So yeah, that's just some background.
Okay. What's the film about?
The film is about Palestine, actually, but it's thinking about structures of domination and how they take the land and they control the people. And so when we see people martyred, it's really just a consequence of a structure that's killing the land and the people. And so thinking how that plays out in film is a little bit documentary but experimental, and maybe the land as the character instead of people.
Okay.
Just to add one more thing around the film, and we see it even in our organizing spaces and also in the academic space, is that quite often people who are fighting oppression, even if we talk about like what films get funded or what research gets funded, it's often just pain-driven narratives, right? They always want to know about your pain so that they can also like co-opt it or use it in different ways, but they're never desire-driven films, right? Where is the will and the desire of the people? That's never really present. So this is also another thing that we're trying to do with the film, with its visuality, is also like show another, show another Palestine that is not there in the visual space of this kind of human rights framework, which is constantly like, oh, they're the victims and we must go help them, versus being like, maybe we're all living in societies that are not amenable for anyone's future, be it on a planetary scale, be it human, non-human. And so kind of shifting the visuality of Palestine from this pain-driven to more desire-driven.
Okay. So you've been kind of involved in the last 2 years you've also been involved in the demonstrations and the activism and so on. Can you tell me a little bit about what you have experienced, and also from an inside perspective, what's been happening in New York, and how the authorities have been battling you and going against you.
Yeah. I mean, I think the brutality, first, I'm grateful to be here and to be learning from the movement here, how people are working and thinking and facing the oppression and domination that this government is doing in supporting Zionism and the genocide. In the context of the United States, Palestine has always been central to our organizing as far back as Occupy Wall Street in 2011. And we have always thought that the triangulation of struggle, Black liberation, free Palestine, and indigenous struggle, that triangulation in our organizing can upend empire from New York. So I think like we've done things, organized around museums in the universities, but when October 7th happened, we felt like that was finally the call from Palestine, from Gaza, to go back to the roots. This is an anti-colonial struggle. And so we, as many people did around the world, we talked about a free Palestine from the river to the sea. We talked about no one can represent the Palestinian people except the Palestinian people, not an authority, not anything like that. And then the kind of organizing on campus, you know, as a professor, I was at NYU, and I got one of the people who got fired. But in that lead up, after getting fired in 2024, students taking up the campuses was a product of many years of organizing in the city, starting Columbia and then New York University, which was the second within a span of a week. The organizing we managed, at least in New York, to quickly organize and for it to have a lot of support because of the kind of connections we made with other struggles. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the Palestinian struggle from the streets, from the campuses, from different places was rooted in the kind of work that we were doing, because we were saying, you know, Palestine is everywhere. Mm-hmm. Palestine brings us together. Mm-hmm. Palestine clarifies how you're getting screwed where you are. Mm-hmm. But the centrality of Palestine in our organizing also meant that the levels of state repression were enormous. Mm-hmm. Firing people, doxing people, frivolous lawsuits, these militias that would show up at people's houses, the connection of the media where they would put an article out front page. Mm-hmm. You'd be in the subway and you see your face front page, and then you go home and then they're waiting for you. They know your address. This connection of the NYPD, the Israeli government, the Zionist militias in New York City, and in fact all governmental institutions work towards suppression. Right, in the name of anti-Semitism. And I think this is similar to what I think is happening here, but the levels of I don't know, the degree by which they did this was eye-opening. And we all suffered, like I was, for Palestine work, under federal investigation since 2019, you know?
Yeah, I think, we started also thinking about the arts and cultural sector and academia around Palestine way back in 2010. One of the things we realized that in the US, and I mean you see that here in Europe also, we have this idea of progressive except for Palestine. So what we would have is a lot of people, organizing other struggles or in solidarity, especially institutions, but when it comes to Palestine, everything crashes. And we can see that, right, in the current reality of the things. Palestine has changed that reality completely. Right, and this is why I think when we say to free Palestine, we also have to free everywhere else because of the same reason, because what Palestine brings to the table. So in 2010, we organized a lot of different things around bringing cultural workers and academics to start thinking about Palestine and how is that central to our issues. So that's something that we've done. Also with a lot of institutions like museums in New York City, because what we have is, like, I can give you the example of MoMA, which is the Museum of Modern Art. We did a thing called Strike MoMA. So this idea of striking the institution, because there's a lot of people like us who've never really cared about MoMA, and so we always had lives outside of it. But then what happens when there is a Museum of Modern Art which actually is dictating aesthetics and art for the whole planet, right? Not just New York City. It's like, is this kind of machine which is working on this global level. And then what do you see is, when you look at their board members, it's people like Leon Black, who's connected to the Epstein files. It's somebody like Larry Fink, who's part of BlackRock, which is, again, related to Vanguard, State Street, who are all part of the occupation, right? Then you have something like General Dynamics, which is part of surveillance systems across South America, everywhere. So what you see is that they're together. They're together in it all. And for them, this whole planet is something that they can just extract from, play with, and just, displace and make these genocides happen everywhere, right? So then here's an institution which has that. So what we did with that was, like, we looked at who's on the board. and what communities do these kind of people are eradicating and erasing. And then we kind of came up with this idea of the interconnected struggles, where Palestine was central, but then so were places like Puerto Rico, the struggle around policing in New York, Dominican Republic, right? So basically coming up with this framework of interconnected struggles, because a struggle at this point has to be planetary, right? And it has to go beyond this idea of the nation states. So kind of going at these institutions also as a pedagogical tool, because once you go do the actions, the kind of media narrative that comes around it, it's also important to share our vision, through that. So kind of thinking about these spaces is like, how can we also change consciousness and shift consciousness, because that's really where the work needs to be done today.
How did you experience, because so you also been kind of involved, of course, and had your somehow with the for example, Black Lives Matter movement before the genocide, or before the full-scale genocide,
right?
And how did you experience this movement, the Black Lives Matter movement? How big a part of the movement was loyal to the Palestinian cause from the 7th October when it happened?
Yeah, I mean, the work around the connection between Black liberation and the Black Lives Matter movement and Palestine got energized and reconnected in 2014 with the war on Gaza. So like through that connection, we went, for example, to Ferguson, where they had killed Mike Brown. We went over there in solidarity. We had conversations with people on the ground. Those relationships continued, and the infrastructure of different movements was also deployed together. So the kind of network that was happening was really solid. I think during the Black Lives Matter movement more recently, I think there's a lot of repression that happened in 2020 after the pandemic, in terms of the rebellion and the Palestinians standing with them, that by the time that October 7th happened, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear of joining the struggle in big ways, and there was a lot of counterinsurgency of actually dividing people. Because what they don't want people to do is recognize that we share an enemy. Because what BlackRock is doing, why do we say BlackRock? I think because BlackRock is our common enemy, for example, because BlackRock invests in the 5 major companies that are profiting off of the genocide in Gaza in terms of selling military equipment. It's the largest investor of General Dynamics, of Raytheon, and whatever that is exchanged on the Wall Street. Imagine. So when we were talking about these kind of oppressors against black folks, we're also talking about oppressors of Palestine. That idea, bringing it in the organizing, meant that more people will participate, and it meant that it was more structural, the kind of disruption you can cause. So they learned from this and they adjusted. So when October 7th happened, one of the first things that they were trying to do is separate other struggles from joining. And the claim of anti-Semitism was how they did it.
So were the demonstrations in New York from day one?
Yeah.
And how did you experience the reaction of the government? How did they react from the beginning?
From the beginning, it was interesting because in New York City they put up major Israeli flags everywhere, and in Times Square they gathered with the mayor and they had this thing. So the government was saying this was a genocide against the Israelis. But the Palestine movement on the ground was pretty solid in its understanding. And I think by the second day, people were out in massive demonstrations, taking the bridges, taking the roads, immense amount of cops, but still too many people for them to get involved. We saw a difference when the protests were happening in Arab neighborhoods or immigrant neighborhoods. In those, the brutality was actually manifest. But we were able to take the bridges for the first maybe couple of weeks without intervention, and then there was altercations and fights, and they would do the kind of riot gear on us. But they had to back down. And I think that that type of organizing was coupled with direct action, meaning the paint on places, marking the genocide to make it visible, letting people know that they cannot hide what they are doing was also another dimension. So you would say that the organizing was operating on multiple levels or in different spaces. At the level of the university in terms of events and going on and protests, at the level of the neighborhoods in terms of people coming out, but then more clandestine stuff. And then there was always this notion of escalation and how do you escalate. And that's where it led, I think, to the organizing around taking on the encampments, creating the encampments. And the encampments being not just it's to make visible the genocide, but it's also to gather and to be a media maker outside of the algorithm, and to allow people, you know, whether it's giving information or doing film screenings, like I think happened in many places in Europe, it became a huge catalyst. Particularly in New York, it was important because our universities are central and they're in largely Zionist. You know, it's a Zionist city, but it's definitely Zionist where you are in Colombia, for example. So it meant that by being there day in and day out, you were making their life uncomfortable. They could hear it, they could see it, they can't ignore it, and they're wondering why they cannot squash it.
Okay. Now Mamdani is his name. Mamdani, he's gonna take over the mayor's office in New York now. And yeah, and it gives, you know, it seems like people are reacting in the same way when Obama became president,
right?
You know, but it's still, you're reading a lot about that now. He's actually been surrounding himself with the same people that were surrounding Obama and so on, receiving money from this from the George Soros family and so on and so on. So what are your hopes from this guy?
Hopes from this guy, none. I have no hopes. I also don't live in New York anymore, so I mean, you can talk a little bit more about this. But I think just quickly what I would say is that I think we have to understand that the United States is a settler colonial institution like Israel is and like Canada is and all of these places. And so while these kind of, you know, democratic socialist kind of people can provide some relief because, you know, the fascists are quite insane, they do provide some relief, but that's not the answer, right? We have to kind of work structurally to, you know, think about a different option altogether, right? Because at the end of it, these are Western places which are extracting from the global south in all of these ways. I mean, what you're seeing in Gaza is also about the canal that they want, right? The port that they want, the resources that they want from Gaza. They're doing the same thing in Sudan. They're doing the same thing in so many different parts of the world. For what? For this way of life to exist, right? Which is this kind of very Western, individualized, like everybody has debt, everybody needs a car, everybody needs a house. So even when he's coming around and saying, oh, I'm going to make New York a livable city, it's still working just within that framework, right? And New York is not our future, you know. New York is one future, right, which is becoming very clear, which is like this, you know, this life which is heavily surveilled, right? Everything's on your phone with the app. The algorithm is dictating the way you live. That's one side of the future. But Gaza is also another side of the future where it is under siege, right? It's under occupation and under annihilation because of what it represents for modernity and for institutions like this. So I think it's important to make that distinction in terms of like where we go, because democracies don't really work anymore, right? We see that all over the world. Democracy is not the answer. So in the most immediate, because, you know, as these structures are falling, it's okay because it provides a little bit of relief than, let's say, Eric Adams or, you know, other mayors, because Eric Adams was a disaster. It's a whole other level.
No, he just went to Israel and completely submitted himself and admitting that he was serving Israel all the time.
And all these people, like, I mean, Eric Adams thought he was doing God's work. You know, he actually went and said that the fact that I've been elected as the mayor of the most strongest city in the world, I am doing God's work. Therefore, I am God. These people are delusional, right? And, you know, power has a way of functioning, right? Even a person like Mamdani, who on a personal level might actually be on our side. But if you have to work within power, you do get co-opted and you get within the thing.
Yeah, so, and it seems like, of course, it was fresh, it was how to say it, it seemed like a little bit, there was some kind of relief in the beginning. It was, okay, this guy, let's see what's happening. But then I must say, I started what made me suspicious, it was like, why he keeps smiling all the time? He's like, he has to smile in every... what's there to smile about? Come on, man. Yeah. And you're standing in the middle, and you're supposed to be some kind of spokesman for the community and talking about the genocide, and you're still smiling all the time?
Yeah.
What's there to smile about? And then I started to get suspicious, and then I started, of course, to read about who's the people he's surrounding himself with, where does he get his money, and so on and so. And I think still many people, and also here, everybody was, and also many people who are sympathizing with the Palestinian cause, treating him like he's a savior. He's going to save Palestine.
Yeah.
What do you think of this? And also as a Palestinian living in New York.
I mean, we kind of, one of the alarming things about it was when he tried to take back the idea of globalize the Intifada by submitting that actually the Intifada is something violent, anti-Semitic and this and that. And then we pushed back on that, and he kind of, didn't say that again. But the issue, I think, with Mamdani that we were facing with the movement is that people are feeling a lot of pressure economically, a lot of pressure. There's no future, there's no history, there's nothing left for people, and they were looking for a savior. Right? And here's a young person who's kind of saying there's a genocide, who's kind of saying, Palestinians should get something. So he was giving something. And in the midst of all of that, there was this strong movement for Palestine. So he managed to get around 70,000 or 90,000 volunteers, largely who got activated through the Palestine movement. What we couldn't do is say, for example, to attack him, because attacking him, again, would have been not understood by the broader population. But what we said and we believed, and we'll get to the part where it's like, what is he doing, is that the idea of voting is a tactic. People should do it, but it's not a strategy of liberation. And if we know that, then each group of people can do what it wants, but if they take us and then we're canvassing for them on a platform that they just pull back, we've been used, the genocide continues, right? Yeah. And our condition does not get better. So building outside of that becomes important. When I look at like Mamdani right now, I know that the governor put conditions for working with him. Why? Why? I mean, we should ask ourselves, why do they get to put conditions on us if the people elected a person? And then he kept the same commissioner of the NYPD. Right. This person, you should look her up. She's from the Tish family, billionaires, and she's a staunch Zionist. What she said on October 7th should not be ignored. She was saying how basically it's our fault and we should be eradicated, and Israel is justified in defending itself to the point of annihilation. That's the person that's responsible for the NYPD. And the NYPD is an army in New York. It's an army. So you see that if he's a good person, which I think he is, and he's well-meaning, which I think he is, and he'll do whatever he can within this structure, I believe that. But when you have the governor against him, the Democratic Party against him, and the NYPD as an army against him, and the billionaires in New York against him, what do you think he's going to do? I mean, it's that simple.
If you think that if he would continue in a way that that the movement could stand behind him, and really represent the voice of the movement, would that lead to that they might assassinate him, actually, if he was for real?
And that's possible, right? So I think the assassination is a possible, the political pressure is a possible. I do think that him being elected is better than someone else like Como. And I think that he's susceptible to pressure from the Palestine movement. So the movement on the outside can push him, and that I believe. And I also believe even people should know, if he fails, it won't be because of this person. It'll be again because of the structure. And what that will do is further radicalize. And that's why the position wasn't to attack Mamdani, but the position was to clarify electoral politics maintains the status quo. And the status quo is one of genocide.
Yeah, and we just had a local elections here in Denmark with the local governments around the city halls and around the country, and we also have several political parties on the left pretending to represent the Palestinian cause, and at the same time working against the Palestinians. They are they're supporting the state of Israel's right to exist and defend itself, and talking about two-state solution, the ongoing, the forever two-state solution, the talk bullshit, and still going to the election, pretending they're representing the Palestinian cause, and many people still falling for it.
Yeah.
Many people falling for it, and the party that actually got the most vote here in Copenhagen is they're in government, and they've been talking with two tongues the whole time.
Yeah.
Supporting Israel, supporting the right to defend themselves, two-state solution. They've been a part of implementing new laws that criminalizes to question Israel's right to exist, and so on, so it was still unbelievable that so many people are watching the news. Now, I'm not talking about the commercial news, but actually have been following what's actually happening and sympathizing with the Palestinian people, and still falling for the same bullshit, and going and voting for these people are voting for status quo for the Palestinians, or even worse than status quo, the annihilation of the Palestinians. So this is unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. That's why I think, like, even right now when people are saying you need to take a position of anti-Zionism, I think that when we say free Palestine from the river to the sea, it necessarily means you must be anti-Zionist. Zionism and free Palestine are polar opposites.
Yeah.
So there is the idea of a two-state solution is one that maintains Zionism.
Yeah.
Even the idea of a one-state solution, if it's Zionist, it's still genocide. And when we actually came together in the streets and together and across the planet saying free Palestine, we were standing against a genocidal system that's planetary. And we're saying Palestine is a strategic engagement. And what people did in Gaza was say no. And that's a call for all of us to take up that call of liberation, of autonomy, of our own infrastructure, of actually doing what we're supposed to do where we are. These politicians may be well-meaning, right? But they are not the solution. And if they're the only option, right, then it doesn't matter what we do. They will always co-opt it. And we will feel further terrible. While what happened today, we were talking about it. Over 30 people they killed in Gaza. They bombed beyond their stupid yellow line. And they're bombing people in south of Lebanon, and they're bombing people in the refugee camps in Lebanon. And they just arrested 100 people, and now they're taking people out of Nablus. They're not going to stop.
No.
So a Mamdani or anyone saying we're going to celebrate that, they say, oh, there's a genocide.
People have been neutralized by the term ceasefire.
Yeah.
This is, nobody's reacting to the ongoing genocide.
The genocide that's ongoing.
Because they say there's a ceasefire, and there's just been a UN resolution, so everything is under control.
And we know that it isn't under control, and we know that we are not going to stop.
Yeah.
And we know that Palestine is a just cause, and the people and the land must be free. And that's why people should not insist on this idea of electoral politics as being the solution. Yes, we can use the idea of meeting people on the street, telling them about Palestine, having them hold their politicians into account because they are funding a genocide, because they are supporting a genocide. But what this is supposed to do is further the crack of liberation, of possibility, the rearrangement in our society towards each other so that they're isolated.
In many ways, the U.S. movement, and maybe especially in New York, I wouldn't say light years, but they're still ahead of the movement here in Denmark. Because you've been organized for years before that, But like we talked about before, there's been struggles before the 7th of October, which has actually so after the 7th of October, just made the movement even stronger. And I think the movement in Denmark is completely new. There wasn't really a movement before the 7th of October, in very small scale. So how do you... Because now I see, and I know many people agree with me, that now that the focus is not on Gaza all the time, we have to also focus within our own borders and to look at how Zionism has infected our whole system, the media and of course most importantly the government. How do you fight against that? How have you been fighting and exposing Zionism? What's your experiences with that in your movement?
I mean, New York is the epicenter of Zionism. It really is, because it's also the place which has financial power. The New York Stock Exchange is there, and like as we mentioned, BlackRock, which is a huge mover in the New York Stock Exchange, has its headquarters in New York City. BlackRock is also something that burned the Amazon a few years ago.
They're buying they start soon. They own half the city here as well.
Yeah, and as you must have seen on the news, most of the major media platforms, like even TikTok, just got bought by a Zionist. Meta is Zionist, right? If you look at universities in New York, those are Zionist spaces. You look at any art institutions, ChatGPT, everything. Yeah. So when we're talking about Zionism at this point, it's in every single structure. I mean, just pushing a button on your phone is Zionist at this point, right? I mean, that's the reality we are living in. And so I think the thing that we've realized from New York is that while we are fighting these structures, while we are kind of dealing with Zionism, we have to also kind of create our own, because there's no way out. Right? There's no way out of this. We'll die reforming this thing and it won't go anywhere, right? But we know that it doesn't feel like, even if reforming it, it doesn't feel like it's home, right? It doesn't feel like it's yours. And that feeling, I think, is very important when you're thinking about like what kind of world do we want to live in. And at this point, it doesn't matter whether you're in the global south or you're in the global north, because there is a global south in the north, right? There are people like, here organizing, or there is a global north in the south, right? The corporate world is everywhere. I mean, capitalism and Zionism, which are twin at this point, have not left any corner of this planet, right? And so what we have is this trifecta of governments working with capitalism, which works with Zionism, and the three literally owning everything. So it's become about ownership of land, ownership of communication resources, ownership of clothes we wear, right? Ownership of culture, knowledge, everything. They want to own everything. And they want to make sure that if you're not in line, you're disposable, right? And by that, what we mean, like, if you have a job, in order to keep your job, you need to keep your mouth shut, right? So if you don't, you're disposable. And then what will happen? The state will also not benefit you, because the state is at this point not a welfare state, even if you're thinking about it in terms of socialist spaces. So I think the thing that we're learning from New York is that the importance of building our own infrastructure. So like I think communication platforms, like what you're doing here right now, like in terms of making media that puts our narratives out, right? In terms of thinking about structures of food which feed our society. These are all things that are really important, because the way this thing is working, there's this idea of the colonial matrix of power. It comes from Anibal, I'm going to pronounce his last name very badly, Cujono, but people can look it up. He talked about this idea of colonial matrix of power, and that how colonialism works is like a matrix. So in that matrix, you have knowledge and subjectivity. So we can think about, all the languages, the romantic languages in the world that are thought of as like, the ones that have knowledge. Gender, racism, sexuality is another economy, and theology, like, how the religious kind of frameworks. So we're seeing that this idea of what Zionism is working as a matrix. It wants to kind of take over everything. So our response also has to be on that level, that we actually think about how to free ourselves both from our body and the structures, right? So those are the practices, I think, that we've learned that in New York, that this idea of like the exiting from the system and not assimilating into it has to be a very big priority for us wherever we are.
I hope I'm not going to expose something I'm not allowed to, but yesterday you had some really beautiful food that you made. You're an amazing cook, and you also talked about this while we were eating this beautiful food, that how Gaza is actually just the beginning. It's like an experiment for how, of course, with weapons and how they're going to treat. This is like Gaza is just a reminder how the future is going to be, how they're going to treat the whole planet.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we say Palestine is our future, but what they're doing in Gaza right now is an experimentation of what we see the future in the United States being, an annihilation of the land, right? And then not of the people, of the land, and a removal and killing of the people, and then create something in which whoever's left, that becomes enslaved labor. It becomes labor in which you have to work in order to eat. That's the model. BlackRock fits. I mean, who are the companies that they say are going to be there? Tony Blair. This is serious stuff. They are serious about this. This is not a joke. That this is an industrial city. What kind of industry? Tech. So you have Elon Musk on one side. You have Trump Towers on the other. Riviera for who? This model of colonialism that they're experimenting with in Gaza is supposed to be part of the New World Order that they're unleashing on us. Palantir, the idea of control. When you saw them getting Palestinians taking a picture, biometrics, everyone is digitized for them. Then the idea of money being digitized. The idea of being unable to go or come, and for these rich people, like a day ago, where you saw them wine and dine, like something from a Mussolini film, right? That's what we're seeing over there. That future is being experimented on us over there, and it's what they imagine a new form of colonialism to be, right? But in that same breath, we're saying they didn't defeat the resistance. People didn't give up. People fought back. The courage Gaza has demonstrated should actually fill us with courage and responsibility. Not something that you say 2 years and then we stop, we weren't able to do it, because it's coming for all of us. That future is coming for all of us. And you just mentioned this. When we say BlackRock is doing what and Blackstone and those two companies are part of the same, the U.S. tells us that no one is going to be able to own a home. That means that you have to pay rent. That means that you have to work. That means if you don't have money, you won't have housing. People without housing are being criminalized. People who are criminalized then have to go to prison. Those prisons are for profit, and their stock is being exchanged on Wall Street, right? And the more you go into debt, that's on a spectrum of enslavement. Because what is slavery but being your body is not yours, it's someone else's, and you're in debt. Even when they tried to get people out of slavery, what did they do the civilized way? Buy yourself out. That's the future that we're seeing in Gaza right now. It's a total domination over land and people for their interest without our ability to say anything. The idea of the Europe being outside of that, we know is not true. We know it's not true. But the whole society needs to know it's not true. And in doing that, the fight at home here can unsettle everything if Palestine is the center that helps us understand this place.
One of the things that's also happening is they don't want people to have any relationship with land anymore, right? And I think we're seeing that across the planet, right? One of the things that they're doing is whoever owns land, unless they're big, landowners and they can assimilate within the system, they want you to not have any land. And we're seeing that even in the West Bank, for example. Like all the Bedouins have been moved into even villages. What they're doing is they're pushing people into cities, and there's 5 to 6 big cities in the West Bank, and so what they want is to make them, they already are open air prisons, but to kind of put everybody just in those cities and kind of create these basically concentration camps at the end of it, right? And we are seeing, in Palestine we see the most drastic, the most extreme measures, and other places too, like Sudan and other places. But I think what we are seeing right now is that they don't want people to have land. They want ownership of land, and they want people to live in cities where you can control them and dominate them, and kind of have a future that looks like that, right? So this technological future of the fasting, these 15-minute cities where fastly approaching, that's their project of humanity at this point. So when you say that this is happening everywhere in Europe, you're right. We have to kind of think about another option at all levels possible, and Palestine is kind of the future in that, because it's saying no to that kind of a life, right? What is the reality of Gaza that they want? They want to make Gaza into Dubai, because that's what the UAE does, right? And so we're seeing that that's the option. It's very clear. Modernity in this way, either you accept it or we shove it down your face, right? And that's what's going on. And so I think one of the things that we also talk about is that, and a lot of research has been done on this already, that modernity is actually the darker side of colonialism. One of the things that modernity played is that we're all equal and we all have human rights. So what happens is all these struggles, we get stuck in fighting in the human rights framework, which is their framework, and then they make us run in circles, right? And that's what's going on. You look at every movement, it has a period of 3 to 4 months where the initial impetus is there, and then everything comes to co-opt it and shut it down. And that's something that we're struggling with everywhere, right? So then how do we create this future that's for all of us in all these places who have this experience of fighting genocides and colonialism? So then what is our reality? What is our future? And how do we think about that?
I wanna add, like, I think the questions that we're facing with Palestine need to be collectivized for the world. In other words, it's going to be hard for any single context to answer it. But we all have to understand right now that the commitment that this movement has demonstrated across the planet, in which that it's only continuing to grow. We may not see it, we may not know it, but it's growing because it's touching a nerve and a pulse of what people who are oppressed feel. And I think that this commitment that many of us have, that to free Palestine, we must change the world. From there, that recognition, and to know that Palestine is everywhere. Palestine is everywhere, and if you don't think it is, look around, and if it's not, it's coming for us. But that other side of it is Palestine is about beauty, it's about love, it's about a commitment, it's about each other. We're more than them. We're stronger together. So then when we fight in our city or we fight in our neighborhood, Palestine must be present. And then in the midst of all of that, whether it's housing or whatever, you fight against your landlord, you fight against the big corporation, but ultimately that fight opens up a space. How do we create something else for us here if we're not taking care of each other now? And that's the next phase of this movement. They're not separate. Direct action, all of these kind of things are important. Whether you use law as a tactic, it's important. But the strategy has to be a refusal of this genocidal system to the core. We cannot normalize with it. We must, and maybe some of us, even in our families, don't get it. If they don't get it, that doesn't mean that we need to unite and come this way. Because that's what's happened in the United States, that's what's happened in Israel, that's what's happened in Europe, that's what happens everywhere. They tell us we're being unrealistic. They're telling us, well, you can't change the world. We're trying to say that if we begin from the premise that it's killing us, then we figure out the answers together. Many of us actually are able, even though we've gotten fired, to continue the work. Because in New York, we've created networks of care. It means that I don't have to work as much as other people, but the other people are working, and then that funding, not through organizations and NGOs, but through people who are committed to liberation. And then that life that we live together allows us to continue to resist, allows us to come up with our education, allows us to do these kind of things. Because the truth of the matter is it's a question of time. Israel is falling. And I think they want to hide that, and that's why they want to normalize and they want to compromise. There is no compromise with genocide. And I'll say this, people, and I know that we've faced this in New York, where people is like, but we need to stay focused on Gaza, for example, or we need to stay focused on Palestine. Or if we just do that, we know that everything is connected, but now's not the time. The truth is, the strategic choice is to unsettle everything right now. And when you make these connections where people who are also oppressed don't feel recognized by the system, then you're creating an alliance that unsettles them because they want us divided.
And I'm just here moving towards the end of the conversation. We sit here in Denmark, we sit inside the warmth, the snow is falling outside.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah, but it also reminds us that it's the 3rd year of the genocide. And now that the Palestinians in Gaza, they have absolutely nowhere to hide now. It's, they're living under horrible conditions. And now, we just moved into the 3rd year of the genocide, and they're still continuing with the bombardment. And it seems like now they're actually pushing up the scales of the bombardment, the Israelis. So unfortunately, our brothers and sisters, they're having very dark days ahead of them, it seems. And I'd like to thank you very much. I know we could continue this talk. We could talk forever, but we have to end it somewhere. But maybe we'll have the chance again to do it.
It's amazing to see the work that people are doing here in Copenhagen.
Yeah, we should do. This is what we need to continue to doing: meeting, and sharing experiences and so on, and make the movement even stronger and more solid. So hopefully, Okay. Thank you. Inshallah. Thank you.